Here's the deal. Several years ago, I created a short mini-series detailing my experiences getting fired from several minimum wage jobs after bouts of serious incompetence and childish behavior. I was from the age of 15 to about 19, a horrible employee, and went on a spree of getting fired while basically degrading into a complete lunatic. These videos didn't get a lot of press on their own years ago when I released them, though with what little press they did get, people went fanatical. One person I recall even discussed getting a tattoo referencing this series. I've remastered them by enhancing the audio, replacing the outdated shitty visuals with 4K ones, and I've also put them in order, and have given them exact dates and ages so you know exactly how the story unfolded. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you How I Got Fired, the movie. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here. Apparently you guys really liked those earlier videos I made about getting fired and thought they were hilarious, which is kind of a shock to me because upon releasing those videos, I thought I was just gonna be bullied and laughed at for being so fucking retarded, I somehow managed to get fired from like 8 fast food jobs. Anyway, this story happened 4 years ago when I was about 16. I had just moved to Billings, Montana with my parents after some family drama, and if you aren't aware, the only things that are in Billings, Montana are toothless hookers and Burger Kings. So when I was 16, I was under the delusion that I was going to be a rock star someday, and the only way I was going to be able to do that was if I somehow earned some cash to buy some killer camera equipment so that I could make some awesome music videos. What ended up happening to that very same equipment 2 years later was I used it to pretend to go on a meth-fueled murder rampage of cartoon characters I didn't like. But you better not tell little 16-year-old Matthew that. He might cry. Anyway, after doing some contemplating, little 16-year-old me decided that the best way to get money for equipment was to get a shitty throwaway job. Now keep in mind, these events actually occurred long before any of my other firing videos. At this point in time, I was a firing virgin. I hadn't been fired anywhere, and I was also an actual virgin too. Anyway, so after deciding that I needed to get a job, I headed out onto the dirty, grimy streets of Billings to see if I could find any restaurants or bars that were hiring. Keep in mind, at this point in time, I had dropped out of high school, so I didn't have any responsibilities all day, so I could pretty much just do whatever I wanted. The first place I went to was this really sketchy, ugly bar for old people, because they had a now hiring sign hanging outside their window. Well, actually saying that it was hanging is giving the place too much credit. It was fucking swinging by a lone string, holding it up in a crooked fashion. So anyway, I go in there, and the only person behind the bar was this old woman, probably in her late 30s or early 40s. I took a seat a few feet away from her at the bar and asked if they had any job applications. The woman responded not by giving me a job application, but by telling me how cute I was. Then, seconds after that, a group of older women the exact same age as the bartender approached me and started loudly exclaiming how cute I was and how they could just eat me up, and one of the women actually put her hand on my leg. At this point, I hadn't a single clue what kind of fucked up pedophile MILF factory I had just stepped into, and I wanted no part of it. So I got up off my seat and headed back out to the streets to find a job. After walking around the dirty, dusty, nasty streets of Billings for hours at a time, I finally came across a Burger King that had a giant hiring sign out front. Filled with false relief, I walked inside and asked for a job application. With this, I was then greeted by the manager of this location, who looked like Edmund Kemper. He was gigantic, at least 6'5", had little to no teeth, and he smelled like a fresh abortion on a summer day. He greeted me by saying, "Hello, I heard you were looking for a job." Though unbeknownst to him, right when he said hello, it felt like a giant bag of rotting shit flew out of his mouth and exploded onto my face. This guy's breath smelled like he had been deeply eating the ass of Susan Boyle every day for 5 years. But I was nice to him regardless because I wanted that job. After expressing interest in the job, the manager didn't even make me fill out an app and just interviewed me on the spot because they were so desperate for employees. I would later find out why. So the first major red flag about this job position was that I was the only young, fit, healthy person in the entire crew. Every other employee was either 400 pounds, a chain smoker, or a woman who looked like they were being sex trafficked in said Burger King. This was not a happy place. But my first day was the next day, and I was just happy that I had finally gotten a real job. So fast forward to my first shift the next day, I didn't have to do anything but observe the other employees to get a general idea of what my job was. In theory, this sounds easy, right? Well, it was like watching a fucking horror movie. Sitting in the dark corner of a Burger King kitchen while watching 50-year-old 400-pound chain smokers have screaming matches at each other over things like oversalting the fries is actually horrifying. Literally, I was genuinely traumatized after my first day working there. I was somehow covered in fry grease even though I hadn't touched a single thing in the kitchen, and I had a massive migraine from the amount of toxicity that was occurring in that kitchen. It was just a fucking nightmare. As time went on and I started actually performing my shift responsibilities, I really started to notice just how toxic and awful the management was. And from what I've heard, this isn't even just exclusive to that Burger King. Burger King notoriously has awful management and terrible, terrible employees. My manager in particular, the guy who looks like Ed Kemper, was a fucking prick. First off, behavior aside, he was a creep. He had just gotten divorced by his wife for cheating and was sleeping in his car outside of the said Burger King. He would frequently come into work crying. I'd literally take an order at the front counter and yell back, "Hey, let's get some fries started." And in response, I'd hear him fucking crying in the back while going, "I just miss her so much." I mean, he was so obsessive and creepy about his wife, I almost expected him to come into work one day with her head chopped off so he could put it in the deep fryer. But yeah, that aside, he was a fucking asshole to me. On my third day there, he was watching me prepare some fries, and I accidentally left the fry scoop in the pile of fries for less than a second, and he started screaming at me about how fucking stupid I was and how he was gonna write me up and ruin my career and get me fired. He was just a real piece of shit, and he wasn't even the only piece of shit there. There was another manager here who was about 500 fucking pounds who would put horrible post-it notes all over the walls all day talking about how she could fire us instantly if she ever caught us breaking rules, and how if we even took 0.1% more food than we were supposed to on our lunch breaks, we would be fired instantly. My other coworkers weren't much better. In the roster of coworkers, there was also a mentally retarded man who should definitely not have been working there. I'm not trying to be rude, but the motherfucker literally couldn't string together a sentence and would drool all over everything, including the countertops where food went. And look, I get hiring the mentally disabled to give them opportunities, but maybe don't give the towering, drooling retard of doom responsibility over food that hundreds of people are going to be eating that day. Anyway, I only lasted 2 weeks at this Burger King. It was that toxic. I hated working there so much, I would actually cry before shifts because I dreaded walking into that kitchen of hell so much. Now, how I got fired is not an interesting story. Essentially, I just didn't show up to work one day, and as a result, I got like 15 extremely angry voicemails from the manager pretty much telling me I'm a piece of shit for not showing up to my Burger King shift. So I called them up the next day, said this is Matthew Holman, and I quit. And then I hung up. I received my paycheck in the mail a week later, and that's really the end of that. So the moral of the story here is to just never ever work at Burger King. I'm not saying don't work at fast food, because not all fast food is bad. Even though I've been fired from places like Starbucks and Taco Bell, at least I can say those places are competent and not pits of hell. The reason I got fired from those places was because of my stupidity. But good God, Burger King in particular is just completely fucking incompetent. The management hate their lives and take it out on the employees, and the food is disgusting. Burger King by far has the most greasy food of any fast food establishment, and being around that all day, every day will fuck your skin up and fuck your stomach up. Just don't work here. If you are considering getting a job here, go apply to KFC or literally anywhere else that treats their employees with a modicum of respect. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and today I have another irresponsible as fuck story for you all from yours truly. See, when I said that I've been fired from 8 different jobs in my life, I'm not lying or exaggerating. I've had a rough last decade, if I'm being quite honest. And today's video in particular is about the time that I got fired from Subway. Now, I'm sure a lot of you don't eat Subway because it's notoriously kind of a gross restaurant, and all of their food tastes exactly the same. But I worked there for about 3 months, and those 3 months were miserable. Now, I fucking despise fast food work with a passion. I genuinely think working in the fucking cartel would be less stressful. So this story takes place quite a few years ago when I was only about 16 years old. I had never had a job before, and I had just dropped out of high school because I'm a genius. And my parents were essentially giving me an ultimatum. Either I get a job, or I go to community college, or I get a girlfriend, or I get the fuck out and live somewhere else. So I chose to get a job. I was living in Billings, Montana at the time, which is a really shitty scumfuck town full of nothing but casinos and prostitutes. It's like one giant red light district. So the only place that was really hiring for anything serious was fast food, and the job I applied to in particular was a Subway inside of a Walmart. Said Walmart was notorious for its criminal activity and mass shooter scares, so that was cool. So a day after I applied, I got the call to do an interview. I went over there that day, interviewed, and pretty much got the job within 2 days, which would be one of the biggest mistakes Subway has ever made, aside from, you know, the Jared Fogle stuff. I'll skip to my first day. My first day there, I learned 2 lessons. Lesson 1 is that humanity is a disgusting, depraved, selfish species. Lesson 2 was that fast food work was soul-sucking and never even gave you a second for yourself. You ever hear the saying, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean? That's something you'll hear a lot in the fast food industry. So anyway, on my first day, I met my coworkers, who were awful, if I'm being honest. You had this really fat lady there named Mandy, who was really flirtatious and annoying and constantly bitching about this or that. Then you had my manager, Cindy, who was pretty hot, but on that same accord, she was also a psycho bitch, who had threatened to write me a referral for doing the littlest things. Like, she threatened to write me a referral because I put too many olives on a sandwich once. Cindy, if you're watching this, your hotness will not get you that far in this life. I also had a few other coworkers, but they were weird, antisocial, nerdy basement dwellers with pube mustaches, who I didn't really feel comfortable initiating conversation with. Now, if you saw my video on how I got fired from McDonald's, my Subway downfall wasn't much different. The first incident I had was on my 5th day. I was making a gross roast beef mustard piece of shit sandwich for some hot girl, and 16-year-old me wanted to impress her because
I was a cool Subway employee.
So in the middle of making her sandwich, I said really loudly, "Want some mayonnaise on this, bitch?" I wasn't calling her bitch, I was referring to the sandwich as a bitch, you know, in a cool way. Like when you say, you know, like, let's get out of this bitch, or let's go do this bitch, or let's blow this bitch. But the girl thought I was calling her a bitch, and the manager and everyone else in the area thought I had just loudly called this girl a bitch. So my manager was like,
"Get in my office now!"
And we had a really awkward 15-minute conversation about sexual harassment and shit, and essentially I got written up. The second incident was about 2 weeks later, and this was my final incident at this location. I'll explain in a minute. Essentially, when Subway's closed, you have to take out all those little food trays, wash them, fill them with the next day's supply of food, then store them in the cooler. My manager told me to do just that, but it was my first time and she didn't show me how to do it properly. So when I filled them with food, I just started stacking them on top of each other in the cooler like some sort of fucked up Jenga game. You're probably not gonna believe me when I say this, but my manager went to double check on my work, opened the cooler, and every single tray I had stacked fell on top of her and spilled tons of condiments and pickles and shit all over her face. There was definitely a good splat of mustard on her tits. Now, she was furious with me, but I think she thought I was retarded because she was faking a smile and being super nice to me after this as if I was like a toddler. Long story short, she was about to fire me, but I revealed that night that I was actually going to be moving to a smaller town with my parents in 2 days, so she offered to transfer me to that small town Subway to work there. So instead of firing me, she just got me the fuck out of her hair and put me in someone else's. Fast forward a week later, I'm working at this small town Subway, and there's really only 4 people working there. There was the boss, who is this really creepy old divorced guy whose daughter threatened to shoot up a school, so that was that guy's reputation. Then the other 3 dudes were just redneck dumb shits in their late teens that didn't really care about anything. Those guys were like 17, and I'm pretty sure they all had children, to give you an idea. And working here was even worse than the other place, because here there weren't any hot chicks or any cool personalities or anything. It was just really old, angry Republicans who all wanted the exact same type of roast beef sandwich. There were also a lot of gay old swinger men who would constantly hit on me, which was extremely uncomfortable because I was like 16 and they were like 50. Now, how I got fired from this place is a bit anticlimactic. See, the owner would give me, at 16, a bunch of cigarettes to smoke in the back because he always had like a whole bunch of them. And when he gave me my break, instead of taking like 15 minutes, which I was supposed to do, I'd take like 45-minute smoke breaks, where I'd smoke like 5 cigarettes at a time and play on my phone. I had given up on my job at this point and didn't really care about the consequences. I was also late to work by like 10 minutes every single day without fail. I don't think I was ever on time to work once. So eventually one day I was serving this really old lady a sandwich and she was going on a rant about how responsible I was for having a job at that age. And pretty much right when she was telling me this, my boss called me into his office and loudly fired me, like screaming at me. And I had to do the walk of shame out of that subway without my uniform on in front of that lady whose sandwich I was still in the process of making. So yeah, that's my story of how I got fired from Subway. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and it's probably obvious to you if you're a regular viewer of mine that I'm not the nicest guy, I'm not very agreeable. I've always been super opinionated and cocky. It's just in my DNA to be a douche, I guess. And my behavior over the last 5 or so years has gotten me in a lot of hot water and has garnered me a lot of wisdom on what not to do in life. I've been fired from about 8 different jobs in my life over the last few years. Today's story in particular is about how I got fired from the popular fast food chain McDonald's. Now, McDonald's is one of the worst places I've ever worked in my life. The working conditions are sweaty and gross, the managers are dicks, the hours are brutal, and there's no union protections 90% of the time with these jobs, so the management can just treat you like total dog shit with no consequences. Now, this story takes place a few years ago when I was 17, I was living with my parents, I had just dropped out of high school, and I wanted to start a short film project, but I didn't really have a budget, and I needed one really badly, so I applied to my local McDonald's so that I could get some income. They called me back the next day, interviewed me a week later, and then boom, I had the job. Easy as fucking pie. Now, when it comes to doing work on the computer, I'd say I'm almost professional level. I take great pride in my video productions and such. However, when it comes to physical labor, I am a useless, retarded sack of shit. And that is exactly what I was when working at McDonald's. The first day there, I realized instantly that it was a mistake to get a job at McDonald's. See, working at McDonald's is not as easy as people make it seem. To be even a halfway decent employee there, you need an amazing work ethic, the ability to work like hardcore 10-hour shifts with just no sweat. You need to be an amazing multitasker, have great communication skills, and you need to be appropriate at all times with the things you say and do. None of these things applied to me at all. First of all, I had no fucking clue how to assemble food, which was my job at first. Making a Big Mac was like rocket science to me. I am the shittiest chef of all time. And on my first day there, when I was preparing Big Macs and shit, I was so piss poor at it. There was an entire line of cars wrapping around the McDonald's multiple times because of me, because it took like an hour to fulfill even a few orders, and everyone hated me for it. So they took me off of chef duty and put me on the drive-thru, which was an even bigger mistake, because 17-year-old me thought the script McDonald's provided you for what to say to customers was stupid and frankly a waste of time. I wanted people to think I was a cool McDonald's employee who was rogue and didn't follow the rules. So instead of being like, "Welcome to McDonald's, how can I take your order?" I shit you not, I'd greet customers with a, "Hey, what's up, you want to order something?" And then when they'd drive up to the window, I'd start casually cussing in front of the customer to look cool. I'd be like, "Yeah, man, this fucking Big Mac is gonna rock your world," and just dumb shit like that. Very few people appreciated it and were just really uncomfortable. I also did something else super douchey, which was anytime a moderately attractive girl was at the drive-thru, I'd hit on her and give her my number, which sometimes would work in my favor, but most of the time it just made me look like a douchey creep. One time I hit on a girl at the drive-thru and my coworker tapped on my shoulder and revealed it was his wife, and he had multiple children, so that kind of put an end to that adventure. Now, I wasn't very well liked by my coworkers here, primarily because, well, I was a douchebag, but on top of that, every single person who worked there was extremely Christian. I lived in a town of 2,000 people, and most of them were Christians. And I'm this edgy, heavily tattooed, creepy guy, so pretty much every single person there at that McDonald's was extremely uncomfortable when talking to me. Like, there was this one 16-year-old tiny little white kid who every time I talked to him, he would just freeze up and become super awkward until I went away. I also had this super annoying coworker who happened to be gay, which no problem with gay people at all. I have gay family members myself. But the reason he was annoying is he was heavily egocentric and constantly put others down verbally. Very flamboyantly. He thought he was like fucking James Charles, but he was actually just an 18-year-old McDonald's manager. Every single time an attractive dude came into the building, he would always rush to the front of the McDonald's to take their order first, and then he'd talk about how hot the guy was for like hours. I hated this guy mostly because he always tattled on me every single time I did something mildly against the rules, which, I mean, yes, he was a manager, but it was ridiculous shit. Like, if I just took a few seconds to go to the back of the McDonald's and check my phone really quick, he'd instantly go tell the GM, and I'd get written up. Anyway, I lasted about 3 months at this job before I was officially fired. There were a few incidents that got me written up to the point of being fired, and I'll tell you about all 3 of my major fuck-ups. That resulted in job termination. The first thing I did was one day when it was just me and some redneck dude on duty, I found like this weird turkey baster thing on the cooking table, so I took a picture of it and posted it on Instagram with a caption stating that it was actually a vaginal douche. One of my coworkers saw it because I put it in the hashtag McDonald's, and he told the GM, and she wrote me up stating that I was making the brand look bad, which fair enough, I don't think anyone wants to eat a Big Mac that was next to a vaginal douche. The second incident with me was my most cringy mistake yet. This average-looking girl was at the front counter, and we were flirting because I had to get my douchebag quota in for the day, and I wanted to impress her with how extreme I was. So I started talking loudly with her about how much I like to fuck, and ways I like to fuck. My manager overheard this and put a stop to it as soon as it started. She was having none of it. She told me if I ever did that again, I would be terminated instantly. Fast forward a few weeks, and we're at the final straw of my relationship with McDonald's. See, it was like 10 p.m. and we were gonna close in like 20 minutes. There was really nothing to do because it was a slow day, and we had already cleaned everything up and prepared for closing, yet the stupid bitch manager there was yelling at everyone to still be in their work position, like they needed to stand upright and look productive for hypothetical customers that may or may not come in. But there were no customers coming in. It was like 10 p.m., so I decided to protest this by pulling out a stool, sitting on it, and playing on my phone in the middle of the McDonald's. This resulted in the manager immediately coming out and screaming in my face, "If you're not gonna do anything, just get out!" And that I did, friend. I drove home in the cold snow because it was winter, got on my computer, and didn't really give a shit at all about what had just happened. Overall, the moral of the story is, if you choose to subject yourself to a fast food job for whatever reason, just know that you have to essentially cut off your testicles and essentially be a puppet of the GM, or else your ass is grass. That's the end of this story. I've also been fired from Subway, Burger King, Taco Bell, Starbucks, and Chipotle. No joke, so if you want to hear those stories, just tell me. See ya. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and today I have the most requested story on my channel here for you all today. I've been hyping this one for a while. So as you know, I'm a bit retarded at working a 9-to-5 job, as evident by the fact that I've been fired from 8 different jobs in my life. Though of all the jobs I've ever been fired from, Taco Bell was the most pathetic one to get fired from, because do you know what the fucking qualifications of working at Taco Bell are? I shit you not, there was legitimately a retarded man working there who required a diaper at all times who was doing far better than me at Taco Bell. Now, this story takes place not too long ago, just a year ago when I had just turned 18. I was living with my dear brother, and he required I get a job immediately, as I was living with him temporarily so I could find a place to live that was cool in Portland, Oregon. And the only place that was really hiring near me at the time was a Taco Bell, so I applied there. did a phone interview the next day, and then did some weird in-person interview the day after that, and it wasn't until my first day of actually working there that they revealed to me that I wasn't going to be working at the Taco Bell I interviewed at. I was actually going to be working at a Taco Bell on 82nd Street, which is the ghetto, that was owned and worked at almost exclusively by this extremely Hispanic and Catholic family that didn't speak a lick of English. And yes, there was a culture clash between me and them instantly. They did not train me at all, so my first day was legitimately just me awkwardly standing in the fucking kitchen while these 8 hardcore Mexicans craft burritos at an alarmingly fast rate before my very eyes. And when I did get a little bit of training and got familiar with the staff, they didn't even make an effort to speak English a little bit to help me out. Like, once I was at the drive-thru and the cash register for whatever reason was ringing up a $15 order as a $150 order, and I frantically asked for help from one of the employees who was staring at me by asking, "Hey man, can you please help me with the cash register? It's acting up." And he responded with,
"No puedo ayudarte, lo siento."
Like, what the fuck does that mean? How is that gonna help me at all? Then he walked away. So yeah, I didn't get along too good with any of the staff. They never really helped me out with anything, and I just felt like a burden on them. I was also so shit at crafting food. I don't know if you know this about me, but I am the fucking worst chef of all time. I genuinely think a paraplegic 5-year-old could make a better burrito than me. However, one day I did manage to get in a bit of hot water with the managers. So one fateful day, I'd say maybe 2 weeks after I had started working there, I realized I forgot my pack of cigarettes at home. And I was a really heavy smoker, but I was only 18 and I was in Oregon, and you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes in Oregon. So I asked one of the employees if I could borrow their nicotine vape pen. One of them, who didn't speak English very good at all but was a pretty nice person, managed to understand what I was asking and handed me his vape pen. Now the pen looked very normal. It was sleek, black, didn't have any logos on it, and the oil in the cartridge was a golden brown, which is what I'm normally used to with my vape pens when I sometimes do indulge in the habit. So all was really fun, and I was outside smoking this vape pen, just chilling out in my break, checking Instagram. I maybe took like 30 or 40 little hits of this thing in rapid succession before I looked at the bottom of the vape pen, which happened to have a green weed leaf warning on it. And that's when I realized this was an intense weed vape that I had been puffing on consistently for the better half of 20 minutes. And after further inspection, it wasn't just any weed vape. It was a dab pen with a 90% THC cartridge in it, as it stated in extremely small text at the bottom of the vape. Turns out nicotine oil happens to look a whole lot like dab oil. Now, I started losing my shit because I had just vaped like 20 times the recommended amount, and it was lunch hour, and my shift was starting again in 5 fucking minutes. And yes, I felt it. This was the highest I had ever been in my entire life, and I've eaten a lot of edibles in my day. So I clocked back in, handed the pen back to my coworker who was just about to leave, so I didn't even get any support through this, and I started to take orders at the front counter. Some motherfucker with his stupid little shit kids came up to the front and started ordering this massive order. At least it was massive in my head. And I was in like this weird state of mental bliss. I was like completely dissociated but still working at the same time. So I didn't feel any anxiety in taking his order like I thought I would, but there was a reason for that. So after like 3 minutes of ordering, he gave me his name and it was super complicated, so I was like, what? How about I just put the number 2 as your name? And he was like, excuse me, because he was apparently like a regular and actually family members with the fucking manager. And then he asked me to read back his order, and I did, and it was completely wrong. He ordered like, what was it, like 2 Gordita Crunches, an Icy, and a burrito. I, on the other hand, rang up 5 Crunch Wraps, 6 tacos, 3 Gorditas, and a fucking metric shit ton of nachos. And he was pissed. The total order was like $70, and he said he wanted to speak to my manager, so I told him he had nothing to worry about, and instead sent the order for number 2 through anyway, and they started making it. This caused him to get fucking furious and loud. He wanted to speak to my manager immediately. He also asked if I was stupid, which I was. So my manager heard this ruckus, came out to the front, and holy shit, they were apparently cousins and knew each other very well. So I was pretty screwed in my defense, and that's when my manager pulled me into his office and told me that after my 2-week trial run of working there, I was no longer needed. And yeah, that's the story of how I got fired from Taco Bell. This is kind of a short video, but there's not a whole lot to talk about. This is genuinely the shortest length I've ever had a job in my life. The moral of the story is don't do drugs at work, because you'll probably lose your job. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and today I want to tell you all the story of how I got fired from being a security guard in a dangerous city. So this story actually takes place right after my top 5 unknowns story, which I recommend you watch, link in description. Essentially, when I was 17 and a half, after months of doing YouTube as a full-time career with no other education qualifications, including no high school diploma, top 5 unknowns essentially fucked me, and I was left with no money, no platform, and no job. I had a few months till I was 18 at the time, and I was expected to move out on my own from my parents' house, so I contacted a family member in Portland, Oregon out of desperation, and I essentially made the move out to their place. And the plan was that I was going to live there for a few months while saving and slaving away at a fast food job so that I wouldn't end up homeless. This did not end up working out, as I was fired from like 5 jobs in a row before just straight up being kicked out of that household. I packed my shit, went to a cafe, researched some apartment listings on Craigslist on my phone, found one full of 18-year-olds, I called their apartment complex up and moved in with them that night, with the stipulation being that I would have the money to pay them rent before rent was due. Now this story isn't about those people I lived with, but on a side note, they were pretty fucking awful. They were so low rent, it was 2 lesbians and a straight couple, and they would legitimately just fuck and have orgies in their room with the door open at like 3 in the afternoon. They fucked so much, I shit you not, I legitimately started chugging Black Velvet every single night that I lived there because I couldn't deal with their bullshit. Anyway, I pretty much got a job interview lined up the first day I lived there because I was slaving away so hard at getting a job, and this interview was for a company known as Securitas, which is a security company in Portland, Oregon that has a not so great reputation. After a week of grueling interviewing that required I bust out like 2 hours out of my way to get to the offices, I was finally set to do training, which was also like 4 hours away. It was all the way in Vancouver, Washington, and I lived in Beaverton, Oregon. These training sessions were so fucking brutal. It was like 13-hour sessions of watching anti-sexual harassment videos. There was very little actual training on how to conduct yourself in case of danger, but I did manage to complete training, and let's go ahead and skip to a week from the moment I did finish training. So my first day as a security guard, I kinda realized that I was way in over my head. I was expected, as an 18-year-old who looks like this, to go to Portland's Skid Row and defend bars from bums trying to do heroin in front of the bars. Now, I'm not trying to be racist here, but the bums in this area were almost exclusively black men who were over 6 feet tall. If they wanted to, they could have easily broke my fucking back by wrapping their hands around my waist. Now, the first few days of work, I was guided by a much older and much stronger man who was the manager of Securitas, and I thought I'd always have a partner to do my patrols with around Portland. But little did I know, he was only going to accompany me for the first 3 days after showing me how to patrol. So day 1 of patrol by myself, and I was pissing my pants. I had to walk in front of like 3 different bars every hour and make sure there weren't any bums doing heroin or giving each other hand jobs on the entrance steps. Now, most of my interactions really just included me telling bums to fuck off, but sometimes I'd actually have some real sympathy for the people I was evicting. For example, there was one kid who was very clearly transgender and scared and homeless, probably as a result of their gender, and instead of being a giant cunt to him, I was like, hey, I get you're probably going through a tough time right now, but you can't be on this property. I know of a place you can go instead. That kind of stuff. However, most of the time, being rude was actually part of the job. There was one encounter I had, though, that was fucking horrible. I still get flashbacks of embarrassment due to it to this day. Essentially, one day I was doing a patrol, and there was a mid-40s Caucasian male wearing a button-up jacket and a flat cap, laying face down on the concrete entrance of a flea market. Now, Portland, Oregon has an incredible heroin issue. It's one of the biggest issues there ever, and I was pretty sure this guy was straight up dead of an overdose. He was laying face down, like I said, and he wasn't responding to anything. I lightly kicked his arm, and no twitch or response or anything. He appeared to be making a puddle of drool with his mouth as well. So I figured he was flat out dead, or at least in the process of dying. I called my boss, and he suggested I call the paramedics, so I called 911, got a fire truck full of medics on the scene, and they were pretty sure this guy was overdosing as well. They were super worried and setting up their equipment right there. They started slapping his fucking face around, trying to get a response, and eventually, he revealed himself. He wasn't actually dying at all. He was just drunk and pretending so I would go away. He sprung up from his position, scared the shit out of all of the paramedics, so they backed up, and he pulled out a knife and started swinging at one of the paramedics' throats. Now, I don't know if paramedics are trained to fight. If you're a paramedic watching this and you know how to fight, tell me in the comments if that's a thing, but this paramedic took this motherfucker down. He dead-armed him and tackled him with another EMS, but the guy managed to slither out of the tackle hold and ran away. These paramedics were so pissed off at me for calling them for this dude, and I probably should have just called the cops instead. I put them in so much danger by doing this. They drove off giving me a really pissed off stare. I mean, they might as well have just flipped me off as they drove away. Anyway, a few months into this job, I was not doing so hot. I was known as being one of the dopiest officers there because I was so young and unwilling to actually put myself in danger as a flex officer, and I pretty much overheard the fact that the management was essentially trying to find any excuse they could to sack me. So one day, one of the managers, who's way smarter at manipulation than I am, essentially asked me one day on a patrol we were doing together if I smoked weed, and he was acting like he loved smashing bitches and smoking weed on the weekends. He was just trying to appeal to me so that I'd say yes, and of course I said yes when asked, and he immediately changed his attitude, forced me into the manager's office to take a drug test, which involved me sucking on a fucking weird cotton stick for 5 minutes before it was then put inside this weird cup that told them that I was indeed blazing. If you don't know, it's illegal to blaze as a security officer, and they fired my ass right there. And because of this, I lost my security license, and I can never be a security guard ever again. Not that I'm really too sad about that. So the moral of the story here, I suppose, is never risk your life for a job that doesn't pay you more than McDonald's. I mean, if you have to do it as a job and have no other options, then that's one thing, but if you can avoid it, definitely don't put your life on the line for any sort of minimum wage work. This is a pretty dangerous job. I mean, in that sector alone, there was a security officer a few years back who literally was shot to death just standing outside on 82nd Street of Portland, Oregon. You can look it up, I'm serious. Luckily, Securitas is going under. I fucking hate that company. Because they just don't give a shit about anyone's safety. I mean, they literally wouldn't even give me a bulletproof vest because they said it was probationary. I'm genuinely under the belief that it'd be safer to be in the military because at least in the army, you're given the proper tools to defend yourself and don't have to chase naked meth-smoking bums in small Section 8 housing stairwells for $15 an hour. I think it's super messed up this company hires 18-year-olds. I mean, I'm a small dude, but Jesus, there was some kids there doing dangerous shit that looked about 14. And I think it's so disgusting that these companies get away with just so much shit. Anyway, that's all for this video. See ya. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and today I have quite the story for you all. So it should be a given that this How I Got Fired series can't last forever. I'm not like the fucking fast food Jesus fairy. I haven't worked at an infinite amount of places. There's only really one more firing tale I have for you all today, and that's this video. How I Got Fired from Starbucks. So just for proof that I'm not bullshitting you guys like Luna would, here's a photo of me working behind the till of the Starbucks I worked at. As you can see, I'm thrilled about being there. Now, Starbucks is honestly one of the most miserable places I've ever worked. I mean, sure, places like McDonald's were horrible, but Starbucks definitely took the cake for the job I hated being at the most. So this story starts about 7 months ago. It was right after I had just gotten fired from Taco Bell. See, I was living with my family members at the time, and I was making my money through both YouTube and freelance projects online. But my family members are pretty pretty old-fashioned, and they didn't really understand what I was doing and thought I was just some pathetic grown man playing on my computer all day. So I decided I was just going to get a dumb part-time job I didn't really care about to shut them up while I did my actual work, which ended up being a massive mistake. So I did some job hunting online and found that my local Starbucks was hiring, and I applied. What followed was one of the most tedious fucking rabbit holes of bullshit I've ever been through in my life in regards to a job. So they called me, told me they were interested in doing a phone interview, and then proceeded to not get back to me on the phone for probably about a month, which is just so shitty to do to your future employees. Anyway, they scheduled an in-person interview. I went. It was just me pretending I had a stick up my ass and putting on a fake smile to impress them. Then, before I could even start working, they said I needed to do another stupid fucking thing for them. I had to do an orientation 2 weeks out. So I had to wait another 2 fucking weeks for that shit. Then, fast forward to the orientation, it's one of the worst orientations I've ever been to. They set me and like 3 teenage girls down at a table because I guess those are the only types of people who work at Starbucks apparently. And we were all in this small, cramped, muggy office. The manager that was training us put the Starbucks guidelines manual on the table in front of us, which was like fucking 300 pages long, and then the stupid bitch manager there proceeded to read the 300-page manual, word for word, very slowly for about 5 hours. It was so boring, and it wasn't like they were feeding us pivotal Starbucks information. It was shit like, don't sexually harass people, and don't be vulgar. It was atrocious. Then after that shit, I found out they weren't even gonna let me start working at the Starbucks I lived next to, which is where I applied. They wanted me to bust my ass all the way down to Portland, Oregon from Hillsboro to go to this special Starbucks that had people who could train me. And I thought, you know, fine, I'll suffer through 2 weeks of bullshit for an easy, chill job that'll shut my family the fuck up. What ended up happening was not that. So I was bussing my ass down to the Starbucks every day and working my ass off in the hopes that this suffering would all be over with soon and then I'd be able to work at the location next to my house. Those 2 weeks were awful. See, this was right when COVID-19 was just becoming a thing and Starbucks was freaking out. We had to take so many dumb precautions just to do the most basic menial tasks, and it was miserable. I also watched an old lady die. She had a heart attack at the fucking Starbucks stand and she had to be carried out in a stretcher. Anyway, after I finished those 2 weeks of bullshit, I was finally able to work at the location near me. However, the manager then revealed to me she wanted me to do special cash register training over 50 miles away at some bullshit location I'd have to bus to at like 6 in the morning. So at this point I was like, are you fucking me right now? I am not doing that with a smile on my face. At that moment, I decided I was just gonna fuck with Starbucks because I was done with them, and I did this instead of just quitting because at least this way I'd make some income for fucking around on their dime. So the morning of reckoning came. I got up at like 5 in the morning to go bus down to this sketchy location all the way out in like southwest Oregon. There was nobody on the bus except for me and this fucking pedophile, and I say that because he was like this weird 50-year-old bald dude wearing a trench coat who had a mustache who kept like giggling to himself. I don't know, it was really uncomfortable, and it was just me and him on the bus for the entire hour I was on there. So anyway, I finally get to this location. I'm sweating because of all the goddamn walking I had to do, and I'm there for training with like 4 other people who do not want to be there, and the lady training us was a fucking bitch, and if she's watching this, she knows who she is. She was like this 40-year-old, very clearly single lady who was super passive-aggressive and controlling. Keep in mind, me and all of the people at this training were well over 18, and she was acting like we were all 13 years old and trying to tell us what to do beyond what was appropriate. So I rebelled against her obvious power complex she had by doing things to annoy her on purpose. For example, at one point she was trying to demonstrate something I didn't care about at all, like I think it was about fucking candy sales or something, which had nothing to do with my job. So I started hitting on this small, like, foreign exchange 19-year-old girl student who was also training. I had no actual interest in her, I just knew it would annoy the shit out of that lady, which it very much so did. She was staring at me with like death eyes. The next thing I did was during the next demonstration, I pulled out a pen and a small pad of paper from my coat and started sketching Deadpool right in front of her, which she caught on to immediately and gave me a verbal warning. Everyone was fucking holding back laughter at this training except for her. So anyway, after a few hours of this tedious fucking garbage, she pulled me aside and said if I kept up this behavior, she was going to get me terminated. So I decided I was going to flex my rebellious muscles in front of her stupid bitch face once again. So I said in exact quotes, "Sorry for acting like a douchebag. I haven't had my caffeine today." Now this shocked her sensitive 40-year-old virgin ears. She could not believe I had the audacity to say a mild swear word in front of a grocery store manager. So she took me to HR, and I just gave a blasé explanation of what I did in exact words without even lying about it, and they just wrote me up. I went home and continued going to work after that incident. They didn't actually know what happened at my location. They didn't even talk to me about it for like a month and a half, and I earned a good $800 there before the manager of that location finally caught word of the horrible things I did. He brought me into his office and said, "Look, we're looking for workers who take things a little more seriously, so we're gonna have to let you go." He had a smug, like, businessman look on his face, as if he just totally overpowered me and owned me. But I metaphorically spit in his stupid face by saying, "Okay, bye," in a blasé way, and he looked so defeated. I very aggressively grabbed my final paycheck off his desk and left the office, leaving his door open as a final fuck you. That's my story of working at Starbucks. How's it going, guys? CrackedRack here, and today I have one final story for you all in regards to me getting fired from a business. Now, when I released my last How I Got Fired video, which was about Burger King, I thought that would be the last one until I remembered I actually had one more job I could cover for this series. That's right, I've had so many fucking jobs in the last 4 years, I don't even remember some of them. This job in particular I got fired from after less than 2 days of working there. And see, Craigslist has like a now hiring section that showcases local posts from small businesses that are desperately seeking employment. Now, at the time, these posts should have been a huge red flag to me, considering just how desperate they were. They were practically begging you to let them hire you, which is just really sketchy and bizarre looking back. I would just really recommend avoiding the Craigslist jobs section. Nothing good comes from there, especially if you don't want to get raped, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, because of the immense pressure from my family to get another job ASAP, I looked past the sketchiness of these posts and found a job listing for a call center just out of town that was offering $17 an hour, and was actually offering up to like $25 an hour depending on how well you perform, which in my mind was fucking amazing compared to the 3 Sacagawea coins a month I got from Taco Bell. So I called them up, they answered, we talked for a few minutes, and before I knew it, I had an interview. Lined up tomorrow night, in fact. So, fast forward to the next day, I woke up at 6 a.m. to get ready for the interview, and a few minutes later I was outside waiting for the bus. The bus ride there was the first major red flag to me that this job was gonna suck balls. Why, you ask? Because it took like 3 fucking hours to get there. Even taking Uber there would have taken at least an hour and a half. I foolishly hadn't checked on Google Maps how far away this place was, and had just blindly set out on this 3-hour adventure. Though luckily I had arrived just in time, and when I eventually got there, I saw that there was also a few other people in suits waiting outside looking to interview. We eventually were greeted by this really overly energetic, overly excited man who introduced himself as the boss. At this point I was thinking, okay, I'm definitely gonna get raped in a minute, I just know it. But luckily, this man had good intentions, and he let us all into the interview room, which led to one of the most awkward interviews of my entire life. Why was it awkward? Because this fucking coked up Willy Wonka looking ass bitch boss was trying to pitch this job to us like it was gonna change our lives. This was the point I realized that I'm either getting raped in a minute or this job was going to be a gigantic scam. Luckily, I discovered that neither of those things were the case. But the reason this job was so desperate for employees and paid so well is because it was a fucking horrible job. So fast forward to my first day working there and I already fucking hate it with a passion. For one, I took an Uber to work on my first day to alleviate stress, minutes, but it didn't alleviate shit because it was still an hour-and-a-half drive there, and my Uber driver was a fucking idiot who made me late on my first day because his dumbass decided he needed to go to Taco Bell and sit at the drive-thru for 30 minutes before picking me up. Anyway, upon getting there, I'm revealed the true nature of this job almost immediately. So get this, my job was to sell really expensive scam advertising space at a local golf course. And by the way I had to do this was by looking up a yellow page directory of every business local to me, before then spam calling the shit out of them a billion times until they answer, to which I then had to try and manipulate the business owner into purchasing ad space through really aggressive language. Now this may not sound like the hardest job ever, but it fucking is. There's nothing more exhausting than cold calling a bunch of random assholes who are already in a bad mood and trying to sell them expensive shit, especially expensive shit at a golf course they've never fucking been to in their entire lives. And it's not like I could get away with just calling a few of these people in one day. There was a quota that required you call 250 people minimum a day, or else you'd get suspended pay. I was actually doing decently well the first day, or so I thought, when I made a gigantic sale of like $1,500 after calling up a local camera shop. The sale was so big, literally everyone in the office stood and clapped for me and congratulated me because it was so impressive. And the boss even approached me and told me I was a natural and that my work ethic was inspiring. Now, this sounds like a cringy fairy tale lie, right? Well, it won't when I finish the story. See, 30 minutes after I made that sale and felt all proud of myself, my boss announced that the person I called for the sale was actually trolling me and wasn't even the owner of the business I called. It was just some shitty asshole kid. Do you know how humiliating it is to get a standing ovation from like 50 people for something only to find out 30 minutes later it was all a goddamn hoax? The rest of that day, I just felt sick to my stomach and I was exhausted. When I got home, I didn't even want to move. The next and final day of work at this corporation was even worse somehow. I realized quickly that 99% of the people I'd call on a daily basis would pretty much tell me to go kill myself, and the 1% of people who were stupid enough to accept our offer were clearly mentally handicapped, so it didn't feel good whether you won or lost at this corporation. Also, this place was full of these weird, creepy old women flirts in their 40s and 50s who worked there, who would shamelessly just like start rubbing my shoulders and shit when I was calling these businesses, which is really uncomfortable. I know that sounds like some people's fantasy, but it's just extremely bizarre in real life. Anyway, after day 2 of working here, I realized quickly that if I kept working here, I would die of AIDS. Not literal AIDS, mental AIDS, which is even worse. So I decided that night I was gonna quit. Also, I didn't like the management. They were just weird as hell. They'd do this weird thing where they'd all gather around a computer close to me and start watching Mr. Beast videos out loud and talking about how jealous they were of YouTubers like PewDiePie for all the money they frequently make. It was just weird, especially because these were grown men in their 50s with families and shit. But anyway, that night when I got home, I decided I wasn't even going to give this business a 2-week notice, or even a notice at all. They didn't deserve it. They just sucked. I just stopped showing up starting the next day. I didn't say shit to anyone, and I got my paycheck in the mail a week later, which was actually pretty impressive. I'd only put in like 15 hours of work and my paycheck was $500, not including the tips I made. But to be fair, the amount of work you have to put in to get that much money was not worth it. So yeah, that's the story of how I got fired as a telemarketer. The moral of the story is never work at a call center and never work fast food. These two types of jobs go very hand in hand with how they operate, and it's just completely soul-sucking. If you're looking for a fulfilling dead-end job that you only will be needing temporarily, I'd really just recommend being a waiter at a nice restaurant or something. Anyway, that's all for today. See ya. Bonus story. You guys are really curious about how I got fired from Chipotle, and every single day I get literally dozens of messages and comments and emails asking me to elaborate on stupid fucking Chipotle. And let's just say it's a very quick story that I hardly even remember because it was so irrelevant, unfunny, uninteresting, and long ago. The reason I didn't make a video about Chipotle is I felt it just wasn't that interesting. Like, who cares? There's nothing to it. I essentially just started working at Chipotle in Portland when I was 18. They were desperately hiring, and I had just been fired from another job previously, so I applied and I got the job within a few days. First off, let me just say Chipotle is a pain in the ass to work at. It is easily one of the hardest places I worked at of the whole few. The hours are extremely long and demanding, the place is sweaty and stressful and loud and intense all day, but the worst offender has to be, it's like Subway on steroids. You remember how pissed off I was at the fact that I had to manually take out all those Subway trays and wash them and clean them? Yeah, you have to do that times 50 at Chipotle. Just look at this. It's just a nightmare of constant organization and slaving away when you're just about to pass out. Now, the manager and employees of this place also didn't like me because I was, in their eyes, like a spoiled American white child who knew nothing about anything. Meanwhile, nearly everyone who worked there was a traditional, authentic Mexican person over the age of 21 and spoke multiple languages. It was horrible working with them because they were all in their element and I was far from my element. They were all smarter than me about literally everything in the kitchen. They were faster than me. They worked effortlessly, whereas I was miserable and exhausted. They spoke and related to each other in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. It was fucking awful. At least at Taco Bell, there were a few other American dumb, retarded, white people like myself there, but I actually felt like I was in a different country when I worked at Chipotle, and I felt like an idiot. And they just didn't like me. A lot of the employees didn't even speak English at all, so they couldn't even talk to me whatsoever, and the boss thought I was a little bitch, and he didn't even want to lift my spirits at all. I had absolutely no fun or learning experiences from working at Chipotle, and the pay was also awful, so because of these things, I just stopped showing up, and eventually they lowered my hours until I was given a call that I was no longer needed. And yeah, that's it. That's all, everybody. That's my story. Thanks for watching.